Um, but I'm gonna go ahead and start. Like today's presentation is all about finding the courage about your WWOOF dreams, but I think it expands so much more beyond that. It's about your solo traveler dreams, your farmer dreams, whatever your dreams are, because for me, woofing was just one step I took that allowed me to continue pursuing dreams and other aspects of my life. And this will be presented by myself. I'm Brittney Portes, the founder of Gardens of Soul. Jen, if you could go to the next slide. So I'm Brittney. I am a solo traveler. I was a former WWOOFer for 2 years. So when I graduated college, I went on a WWOOFing journey for 2 years that I thought was gonna last 1 month. And then somehow I just kept on doing it because I was so in love with the concept of WWOOFing, the exchange, the community I met. And then and being a solo traveler, being a WWOOFer, it actually has allowed me to really become sure of the woman that I am today, to feel confident in not only just myself, but my farming abilities. And I actually, a year ago, I moved back to New Jersey to manage a community garden and also start my own business, which is called Gardens of Soul, which is a platform where I help people learn how to grow food in their own homes in like urban spaces. I host a lot of workshops if anyone's in the New Jersey and New York City area about just like how to connect with nature, food, and yourself. So today's outline, we're going to start off with talking about what is WWOOF, because I know some people might be familiar with WWOOF, but are still asking themselves, what is the difference between WWOOF and other platforms, and what does it provide? We're going to be talking about my story, finding the courage to follow my dreams. And I talk about it from the perspective of following mostly my farmer dreams and how WWOOF played a really big role in that for me and to where I am today. And I'm going to really break it down too into the 5 steps that I took to WWOOF and solo travel for 2 years. And then at the end, we're going to be talking all about the ways that like really overcoming the fears, because being a solo woman traveling, going to farms, these are oftentimes very new experiences that maybe some of us have never experienced, including myself at that point in my life. And I want to make sure that everyone like feels confident in their ability to be a WWOOFer, to be a solo traveler, because we need more women entering these spaces, because it only empowers more women to do so going forward. And then at the end, we're going to save some time for Q&A, where if you have specific questions, like I said, you're welcome to leave them in the chat below at any point. And Jenna from WWOOF-USA is going to be taking note of some of them, but if not, you can also ask them in the Q&A time. Next slide. So I'm actually going to give it away to Jenna right here. So go ahead and introduce yourself and then share what is WWOOF-USA.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Brittney. Really excited to be here and welcome, everyone. You might be familiar with WWOOF or you might not. I just want to share a little bit to help you understand how it works and maybe a little bit of the background. So a cool bit of history, I think, is that WWOOF is over 50 years old as a global movement. It all started in 1971 in the UK. And there are now over 130 countries around the world where you can go WWOOFing. Brittney's done a lot of WWOOFing in the US. I actually met Brittney while she was WWOOFing in Minnesota. And so, yeah, we're going to probably mostly be talking about the US, but I want you to know that you can WWOOF all over the world. WWOOF is a cultural and educational exchange focused on organic farming and sustainable living. So Brittney mentioned like other platforms. Maybe you've heard of Workaway or HelpX or other programs like this. They're more geared towards being a work trade, where you trade your work for getting room and board. And the kind of the more expansive idea with WWOOF is that you're not just trading your work, you're contributing to the organic farming movement by helping out a farmer. And in exchange, you're getting training and hands-on experience with, you know, whatever those farm activities are, or homesteading as well. We have a lot of homesteaders. There are WWOOF farms in all 50 states, including Alaska, Hawaii, the US Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. And visits, I get this question a lot, like how long do you stay at a host farm? And the answer is you might visit for one day or a weekend, all the way up to a full season or even a full year. It totally depends on the farm and on, you know, what you're looking for out of that WWOOF experience. We do currently have about 1,400 host farms in the US, and they're all different. So there's definitely a lot of different types of opportunities out there. And I think Brittney's going to touch on that a little bit later as far as like finding a farm if you're interested in WWOOFing. And the way that it works is that you sign up at WWOOF-USA.org, you make a profile, and we charge $40 a year for a membership. And that membership gives you a lot of benefits like coverage under an accident insurance policy and the ability to contact all 1,400 of those host farms. I think there's even a special coupon code to get a discount if you make it all the way to the end of this webinar. And then just as a general guideline, since WWOOF is an exchange, it's an educational exchange, typically woofers are participating for about half of each day in farm activities, and they get room, board, and mentorship and hands-on training from a host for the duration of their stay. Do you think that covers it, Brittney?
Yeah, I think that covers it beautifully.
Awesome.
So I'm going to start by talking about life before WWOOF and a little bit just about my background and who I am. So I am the daughter of two immigrant parents. My mother was born in Ecuador and my father was born in the Dominican Republic. And I say that because coming from an immigrant household, I felt like there was a standard to pursue a conventional path. And for me, it looked like my parents wanted me to get a traditional education. So I got my degree in environmental science. But even still, they wanted me to either work in corporate America, work in a lab, have something what they found to be quote unquote stable. And I know many of us often might even be in a 9-to-5 right now, but when I was in college, I just knew it wasn't for me. I knew my soul was calling nature, it was calling farming and agriculture. And what's interesting is even before studying environmental science, I actually didn't even go until my first hike until I was 18. And that was because of a class I took in high school. And it's in having these little exposures to nature, having little exposures to farming and agriculture, it's where it started to spark more curiosity inside of me and realizing that's where I felt at home. That's where my passion was. And WWOOF, when I first learned about it, it was like this opportunity to kind of just pursue an alternative path. And it's maybe alternative to what everyone else might think is not normal, but I would actually argue that there are so many people who are part of the food movement, who are looking for a holistic way of living, who want to learn more about connecting with the land. And that's kind of what I was thinking about. But even still, I also think about, I was really seeking friends who cared about living in connection to the land. I think it's great to have diversity in friends, and I think it's also great to band together with people who are like-minded. And I can certainly say that when I joined WWOOF, the amount of friendships and experiences that have catapulted out of that, it has changed my life because I feel so supported in who I am. And at the time, I wanted to become a farmer, but I didn't know how. So like I mentioned earlier, I grew up in North New Jersey, which if you're not familiar, it is super suburban and urban, houses everywhere. It's the most densely populated state per capita. So there's no farms around me, except for this like one small 1-acre permaculture farm, which is like the biggest farm in that region around me. But even still, I didn't know any farmers that looked like me. I didn't know any young farmers. I didn't know any farmers of color, BIPOC farmers, LGBTQ farmers. And that's why I was like, wait a second, we need more diversity in our food systems. And it starts with each of us. So that's also where I was like, okay, WWOOF could be a really good fit for me. And leading that's where I was seeking diverse mentorship. I think it's great to have experiences from people of all walks of life. I was starting to realize living in New Jersey might have not presented the opportunities to learn about agriculture that I always wanted to learn about. But even when I looked on the WWOOF site, I actually found a farm in South Jersey, which for those of you who don't know, South Jersey and North Jersey are kind of like different states practically. There's more farmland down there, but that was actually how I first got into woofing, because it was just a segue into recognizing and realizing there are more farms in the United States than I even knew existed. Oh, wrong way, Jenna. So I'm hearing about WWOOF. I'm a college student, and at the time I was 22 years old, and it was either pursue the conventional path, apply to 9-to-5s, or take a leap of faith into the unknown and find the courage to follow my farmer dreams. And thankfully, I chose the path of the unknown, but it wasn't just I woke up one day and said I was going to do this. There were a series of steps that I took so that way I made sure I felt confident and comfortable in my decision. Because I think a big part of it too is for anyone who might come from a family or even just a community of people who don't understand wanting something different for yourself. I was getting and receiving a lot of pushback from my peers, from my family members, saying either I was a disappointment or I was going to fail, or what if something bad happens? You know, all the negative thoughts that maybe either your brain is thinking about or people have tried to instill in you. It takes a lot of courage to follow your dreams, but it is absolutely possible. And that's why, if you go to the next slide, I'm going to talk about the 5 steps. Oh, so yeah, there were 5 steps I took to WWOOF and solo travel for 2 years. And just like breaking down, it was rooted in first, like the research phase, becoming really clear on my why. Like, why is it that I want to WWOOF? Why is it that I want to become a farmer? Then taking a look at the different filters, like really becoming familiar with the WWOOF-USA platform and understanding how I can use it to my advantage to curate the experiences that are safe and also the experiences that I'm looking for. And then I'm going to talk about the interview process, how I gauged as a solo female traveler, because yes, I always visited farms on my own. So to make sure I felt safe prior to getting there. And then once I had the farm selected, I'm going to talk about the preparation, both mentally and physically, for how I was able to get the courage to go out and WWOOF. So step 1 is research. I use classic YouTube University. And at the time, I would actually just look up constantly like WWOOF-USA, WWOOF experience, my WWOOF experience. Because for me, seeing other solo female travelers sharing their stories, that actually kind of gave me a little bit of hope and knowing, okay, while I might know any people doing it, I'm seeing people doing it and they're sharing their experiences. And I think what's really great too is just work exchange platforms, solo traveling is on the rise. And honestly, with TikTok, Instagram, you can find so many people sharing their stories, such as myself. And I think like, even if you go to Gardens of Soul on TikTok, Instagram, and even on my YouTube channel, I've shared so many resources, or even like day in the life videos, my top tips, free resources that you guys can consume about like my experiences, because I've had like both positive and negative experiences as a solo traveler, as a WWOOFer. In the 2 years, it's like things are bound to happen, but it's also about resiliency. It's also about being prepared. And I think in doing the preliminary research, it made me think about, okay, what type of things should I look out? What type of farms do I want to go to and visit? And I think the next step is, I would argue, the absolute most important step, because in all things that I do, becoming clear on your why is what roots me in the success that I have today. Because I often say, you know, whether you journal or not, I highly encourage you to even take out a piece of paper, not now, but like write these down. Like, why do I want to WWOOF? Why do I want to solo travel? What experiences am I looking to get out of it? It's what do I want to learn more about? Do you want to learn more about holistic living? Do you want to learn how to use medicinal plants? Do you want to learn how to heal your body? Do you want to connect with more like-minded people? And a question I love to ask myself all the time, if anything were possible, what would my life look like? Because it's really easy to think within the constraints of the things that we know, to think realistically, as many of us are often told. But what if actually things could be better than we've ever imagined? What if we could actually meet up a community of supporting individuals? And I say that because it's like, also, what type of community do I want to feel supported by? I knew I wanted to be more diverse voices in agriculture. I knew I wanted to be surrounded by LGBTQ folks. I knew I wanted different backgrounds. And it's interesting because even as a solo traveler, sometimes it's easy to get lost in your why. You know, you meet other people and maybe you take on their visions, or you take on their expectations of what they think you should want. But always having like a why that you can go back to, it helps you remember why you're doing the things you're doing in the first place. And when things get hard, like say WWOOFing, sometimes say you're working 4 hours under the sun and you're like, this is hard. But then you think back to your why. Or when you're solo traveling and your car breaks down, like my car tire literally flew off once on the highway, and I'm thinking, this sucks. I think back to my why, and I'm like, okay, I'm safe. I'm doing this because I want to explore boundaries. And I also am just ready to like step into the unknown. So now the next step, now that you're clear on your why, we're going to talk about using filters. Okay, if you go to the WWOOF-USA.org website, there is a function called filters. And when you click on more filters, it then brings you to like a different like drop down menus. And I'm just starring here my two favorites, which are farming practices, mostly because some people love to WWOOF because they love the animals. Some people want to learn about like cheese making or very niche things. I personally was just very interested in the vegetables. I love eating, I love cooking in community. So I always loved searching by different farming practices. And then it's also great because they have the mentoring opportunities like LGBTQ operated, BIPOC operated, women operated, to find different locations that have that. And I think what's great too is like, for me as a solo traveler, I always felt most comfortable going to either a woman operated LGBTQ or BIPOC operated farm, because I knew there was someone who shared a similar life experience to me. And oftentimes too, I believe women make great leaders. So I highly recommend those types of farmers and supporting the work they do. You can go to the next page. So the next step is then in the interview process, because you're going to look at a bunch of different farms. There's, like Jenna said, there's 1,400 farms. The number is changing every single day. Hosts apply, farms apply all the time. And it's always asking, what's a good fit for you? And I say that even because you're solo traveling, always have a Zoom or phone call before visiting a location. Farms are magical places. They're beautifully aesthetic. So when you look at a profile, things can always look glittering, shimmering, but it's another thing to have a conversation with the person that you are going to directly be working under, whether it be for 4 days or 2 months or a year. And I like to say, like, this is a good time to see, like, how do you energetically feel around this person? Is this someone you want to be sharing a living space with? Is this someone that, even if you're not in the same home, do you feel comfortable living on the same land with? I talk about safety a lot. And, you know, oftentimes, especially as women, like, it's trusting our intuition. Like, is this a good feeling? Like, do I feel safe staying here? Am I excited about the opportunities and the exchange that are being offered here? Because a lot of it's interesting, like once you find the farms that you're honing into, now you're like, okay, yes, I found the WWOOF host that I want to visit. I feel good. This feels good. I would say, if not now, then when? Like, it's time to actually mentally prepare yourself. I would argue mental preparation is much more important than what you physically prepare for, because oftentimes people are like, oh, I'm not strong enough, or I don't know how to grow any food, or like, I don't know how to take care of animals. Guess what? Everything's a skill set that you can learn. And most of the skills, a good WWOOF host is willing to share that and is willing to work with you to learn those skills. But something that each of us work on in our own personal journey of life is that mental mindset. Do I feel safe and confident going to this farm? Do I feel assured in myself? Okay, say you're going for even a 2-hour road trip and you've never left your hometown. That could be a really big thing. Something that I actually did before going all the way to Minnesota for my first big WWOOF trip is like I said, I did a smaller, like a 1-week WWOOF trip in my home state that was only 2 hours away. So that way I can get a sense, is WWOOF a good fit for me? Is this something I'm going to like long-term, to like, you know, like go somewhere far away? And then also I would even think about different ways to prepare yourself, whether it means letting your friends and family know where you're headed to, or even just saying, okay, like the reminder that I can do this. And then we're going to talk about like packing lightly. I love to remind people, it's funny, when you travel, it's like easy to like want to dress, like bring like cute clothes, or like, oh, what if I go out? But oftentimes farms are in the middle of nowhere. So yes, you can find farms, like urban farms, like community gardens and like city spaces. But for example, when I was living out in like rural Minnesota, it took like an hour to get like to actual stores. So I was rarely leaving town, you could say. And I arguably was more wearing overalls, shirts that I was just dirty in, like leggings, work pants. Like, think the practical essentials of what you need, because oftentimes I think what's really beautiful about living in like connection to the land and like the farmer lifestyle is you realize like there's such beauty and simplicity and loving the few items that you do have. But also I would really lean into also learning about your new environment. That's what it is. It's kind of like I could even say culture shock can happen, because I felt like that from New Jersey to Minnesota. One, everyone's nicer. Things, it's a slower pace of life. Um, the work environment wasn't, it's still a fast pace, we're on a farm, but I think it was just very different than how I was raised. And even knowing, okay, is there a hospital nearby? Are there grocery stores nearby? How many? Or like, do I have walking access to it? Because it's really important, if you have a car or you don't have a car, that makes a big difference. And like making sure these are also questions that you ask your WWOOF host prior to visiting, so you don't feel like maybe out of place. Because I do hear people tell me like, I'm a city girl, and then they went really far deep into the boons and they're like, there's nothing around me, I'm stuck on this farm. And sometimes that can actually be a culture shock for some people. So I say segue into it and starting your journey with an open mindset. WWOOF has challenged many of my thoughts, many of my beliefs, not just WWOOF itself, but the people that I've met, the hosts. Oftentimes, they have introduced me to concepts that I've never even thought of. And maybe some hosts might have practices that you've never taken part of, but I think it's a really beautiful time to step into being open to having conversations with people that might think differently, but also might open the possibility of what's to come. So in overcoming fears, oftentimes I get a lot of people like DM me and saying like, how did you do it? Or like, are you not scared? And what I have to say to that is, I had fears. I still have fears. Anything can happen, but I do it anyways. The best things in life are on the other side of fear. That's a quote I heard from like some TED talk back when I was like 22 or something. But I really think about it. It's that leap of faith that you take into the unknown, where that's when the best things happen. When you stay comfortable in the places that you already are, you can't expect new things to happen if you stay exactly where you are. In that first photo, that's me and Jenna out woofing in Minnesota in those abundant rainbow carrots, where we were just having the time of our lives. This next photo, I was out in Idaho. This is me just like road tripping in the middle of nowhere. I was on a hike, and there were actually so many, apparently like Montana has a lot of bears. I didn't even know that, being from New Jersey. And right before this photo, I actually was crying because I was scared a bear was going to attack me. But I challenged myself to step into the forest just so I could segue into practicing how to do solo hikes as a woman in a more wilderness type environment. In this third photo, this is Sarah, who is a great mentor, and she was the WWOOF host at the farm I was at in Minnesota, where it's because of her taking the risk going out there, I now have my own business. I now can manage a community garden, and I now feel so excited to share like the love of growing food with more people. And it's interesting, in the last photo, that's actually me managing the community garden that I currently manage out in New Jersey. And it's abundant, luscious, and growing. The next page. This is now the time for the Q&A. I know this was a really like general overview, but really, I think it all comes down to the mindset. But I want to take a look at some of these questions that we have. Jen, I don't know if you saw anything that stood out to you earlier above.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, I saw one question come in like 3 different variations. And so I think they can kind of get lumped together, but it's a question about like, how did you do this financially? You know, some people want to do this, they want to quit their job and go woofing, but it's like, oh gosh, how do you make that happen and afford to do that?
Yeah, so there were a few different ways. This is where I say it's time to get creative, and also time to think outside the norms of what we're used to. When I graduated, I promised myself I would never work a 9-to-5 in my life. And it's 4 years later, and I have never worked a 9-to-5 in my life. Now, I can't say it's always easy, but what I will say is something I did. I applied to a lot of like agricultural nonprofits. I worked for a few. I managed grants. There was some that I did admin work. I also did a lot of content creation where I would exchange my skills. I would pitch it to different companies. I also would do some storytelling with my content creation. I was really trying different things. For a big portion of that time, I was also doing, I was a host of a podcast show for a sustainability institute, and these were all remote positions, very niche remote positions. Now, and it's interesting because it's like taking a look at what skills do you have and how can I turn this into a remote position? Because I would even look on Good Food Jobs, for example. It's a great site for just like food related jobs within sustainable agriculture. And oftentimes a lot of them are remote positions. And I made sure like some of my jobs were part-time. And for a good 2 years of it, my job was part-time, remote. So I was actually woofing for 4 hours each morning. I had my lunch break, and then I was working 4 hours in the afternoon, and then I had my evenings to myself. So I'll just say it's really looking out, but remote jobs do exist. And if not, I would say a quarter of my income was generated from like online side jobs, such as content creation, that helped to supplement my income while woofing. I also want to say some people also take a different approach to that. I did work the whole time while I was woofing or solo traveling, but also some people like to save up money and then go woofing. I will say if you do that, make sure you have the funds where you feel comfortable. If, say, a farm doesn't work out, you have either a car that you can sleep in or the funds that you know that if you need to go to an Airbnb, nearby hotel or something, a backup plan, that you will be okay to get yourself back home.
Nice. Thanks, Brittney. I want to do a quick woof response to 2 questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So one, Molly said that they're having a hard time hearing back from some of their farms that they've contacted. And so I want to hear what you think about that, Brittney, but I also just want to say, Molly, we do list the response rate for hosts on their profile. And if you're not hearing back from a host, it's possible they didn't see your message. And so just send WWOOF an email through the contact form on the website, and we can reach out to host farms directly for you, just to make sure that they saw your message if you're not hearing back from someone. And the second question, oh, I lost it. Oh no, it's from Sandra. Sorry, Sandra said that she said, I'm a woman in my mid-50s. Are there many mature women woofing? Absolutely, Sandra. There is no upper age limit to woofing. We have a lot of folks who are retirees, middle-aged, up into their 80s, who are out there getting on farms. And we actually have a webinar that we recorded specifically with 3 woofers in their 50s talking about their woof experiences. So if you want to email WWOOF, I can get you the link to that webinar as well. Okay, Brittney, can I field another question back towards you?
Oh, sure, go for it.
Okay, there were some questions. One was like, how do you get a host to do an interview, or like, how do you ask for an interview? And then what kinds of questions would you most recommend somebody ask a host during that interview?
Yes, so in the initial stage, when you're reaching out to different hosts, this is where I say this is your first impression when you're reaching out to someone. Some people will literally just say like, hi, I want to come visit your farm. Let them know who you are. Introduce yourself as if you're introducing yourself to a new friend. Hi, I'm Brittney Portes. I love learning about agriculture. Or like, if you have any experience, share your experience. I honestly think if you have experience, you might as well highlight it. It's kind of like a resume you're like putting out into the world. Or even if you don't have experience, talk about what stood out to you about their profile. Make it personal to them, so that way they feel like, okay, like this person is actually serious about not only coming and participating, but being an active community member at our organization, like at their farm. Was there a second question to that, Jenna?
It was, more so like if you had some key questions that you would ask in the interview.
So key questions, true, in a Zoom call. I always ask the expectations. They might list it on the website, but just have them say it back to you. make sure you fully understand what the expectations and the exchanges. Things I always ask about are what the food looks like. Are they going to be cooking? Do we do communal cooking? Do they expect certain days? Is there like a chore list? I think it's just really important because it's kind of like you're essentially sharing your space and a home with someone and the land with someone. And you want to make sure you have similar ideas about how that's going to look like. I always ask about what the work hours entail, especially because I had strict work hours for my other jobs. I needed to make sure that they coincided, that they weren't going to conflict one another. Because also too, for example, I'm not saying this happens frequently, but I'm saying like, say a farm says, we work 6 hours a day. But then you're talking to them and you hear them say 8-hour days. Something should go off in your head, say, wait a second, it says 6-hour days. Or like, what does the schedule look like? Because I think for me, I love having consistency, and knowing what I'm showing up for is really important. So those are probably my top questions I would ask.
That's awesome. Thanks, Brittney. I saw a question come in that I really like. Did you go through technology withdrawal at all during any of these rural woofing experiences?
Oh my gosh, no. If anything, I was so happy to not be so on my phone. I think this is what I'll say, when you're on the farm, I'm really on my phone, which you are working. Like there is, like there's a purpose to be present during that time. But I would say most of the farms that I stayed at all had Wi-Fi, like really good Wi-Fi. That's also a really good question that I ask all the time, to know, because also if you're working remotely, for example, you want to make sure that you have really stable Wi-Fi. And what I'll say too is oftentimes a lot of the hosts I met were naturally more disconnected from social media or their phones. And it also inspired me to disconnect myself more, because it's like, okay, you could be on your phone or you could be having conversations and just like community together, even like after hours, with the host and the people around you. So that's what I would say to that. Yeah.
Cool. Another question is like, how early were you reaching out to hosts? You know, how far in advance of your visit did you need to be making those plans?
Yeah. Okay. The best case when I'm really on top of it is like a month in advance, I would say. Because the thing is, sometimes it's kind of like dating. Like if you message someone like way too in advance and you don't, there's like a long time before you see them, it kind of like things dwindle. I don't know if that makes sense, but you want to message a host I say within a month, because sometimes it might take, I would give them a week max if they don't respond, and then maybe reach out again. So there's like that possibility. But then it also gives you time to set up with patients a time to have a Zoom call, or like first some hosts only want to have like email conversation first just to see if it's a good fit for you. And then it gives you time to do Zoom call. And then also on top of that, you want like at least a week to like mentally prepare yourself, to physically prepare like with what you need, because some hosts might request that you have like a headlamp, for example, and maybe you don't have one. But I would say at least a month to maybe 2 months in advance, depending too on how long you're staying. Because for some people, if they know they want to go somewhere for like 2-3 months, then that's probably a better chance to reach out in advance a little bit more, just to make sure. Also, like there's highly visited places, like the place I'm going to mention, Hawaii. If you want to visit Hawaii, I don't remember what it is, but definitely like a month in advance is not enough if you want to visit a really good host farm. Jenna, what would you recommend for like those top spot or like top like hosts? What would you recommend?
Yeah, for really popular locations, and I even see we have a host on the call who's typing in the chat, and they're saying that, yeah, people are reaching out in January, requesting visits that start in April, which is the beginning of their growing season. So yeah, I would say, like you were saying, a few months in advance for really popular locations, but I also recommended that to a woofer recently, and she contacted a host in Hawaii, and the host said, oh, I don't even think about visits this far in advance. Contact me in a couple months. So I think it does really depend on the farm as well, which you were definitely alluding to.
Yeah.
All right, ready for another question?
Um,
All right. So Aaron asked, as a queer and trans person, the idea of traveling to a stranger's land can be scary. Can you speak to safe travel around identity?
Yes. As a BIPOC queer woman, I that was probably one of like the things that almost in my head prior, it felt like there were more voices telling me not to. Like I'll just be honest, I was scared to solo travel to the South at first because more people told me that I would be targeted more, or like I don't know, just like all these negative thoughts came up. And maybe they were stereotypes, maybe they were fears, but they were fears that I had and that are very real, unfortunately. So this is where I say really leaning into those filters, because there are some amazing like LGBTQ and trans hosts on the WWOOF directory that I've also have met myself that have been so supportive. And it's great because in talking to them, so many have talked about how like being with other people in identity and being like a role model, like that's what hosts also are. To me, they're role models, they're mentors. And it's like, we might not have all the answers now, but in surrounding more people that look like us or have similar identities or experiences to us, it also empowers us to be stronger in our journeys. And that's really what I can recommend for now. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Brittney. There's a couple questions that came up that maybe I can kind of lump together. Miriam is asking, what's the most surprising thing to you when you started your journey woofing? And I don't know if this will be part of it, but Doris wants to know if you've ever had to have like challenging communication with a host. Like maybe you decided to end your visit early and, you know, how do you navigate that?
Wait, those are two separate questions. I'm like, I want to separate.
Those are two separate questions.
They are separate questions. The first one was surprising thing that happened.
What was the most surprising thing to you when you first started woofing?
A part of me is like how much I loved it. Because okay, the farm in Minnesota, I sent an email, or like when I first said I was coming, I said I was going to come for a month. And then I stayed for another month, and then it turned into 3 months, and then it turned into a whopping 10 months, all in the end. I kept extending it because it was one of those things where I knew I wanted to enter agriculture. Like I really I aspired to be a farmer, but I didn't realize like how much it would mean to me and how much you could be inspired by community and fall in love with the place. Like I really struggled with the concept of home when I was living in New Jersey, because even though I was at home, I never felt at home in like my soul. But like in that land, I finally felt at home with who I was and like what my purpose was in this world. So I think that was definitely the biggest surprise for me.
Thank you. And the second question, which is a separate question, is have you ever had a WWOOF experience where you chose to end your trip early? And how did you approach the host or others in that situation?
Yeah, so there is one time where I had to end a trip early. And what I will say is, thankfully, it happened later in my WWOOF experiences. So I had a greater understanding that, okay, at the end of the day, WWOOF is a platform and the hosts are people. And every host is a person with different feelings, backgrounds, ways they react to things, ways they communicate. And it's no different than having a communication with your friends and your family. And at this farm, I just felt like there was a series of miscommunications happening. And I didn't think we were understanding one another. And I honestly just didn't feel appreciated or valued at this farm. I felt like my work I was just being told to do things, but not necessarily being heard. And like I thought I was coming for one thing, and then I was only doing basically weeding the entire time, which if you're weeding for 4 hours a day, every single day, it causes a lot of wrist pain. That's all I'm going to say. But that was my experience. And I just felt like it wasn't a good fit for me. So then I ended up leaving the farm. And it was a really difficult conversation. I think it's something I would always say is like, you want to have an open line of communication and talk about it. But it's one of those things where it's like making sure you're in a good headspace before, going up to the host, and like maybe like even if you're like scared to have that conversation, like I actually journaled about like what points I wanted to touch on based on like, hey, like this is what I didn't feel comfortable with, or I feel like I've expressed that I wanted to do less weeding and alternate activities, and I haven't been doing that. Like just kind of like sharing what you experienced in a constructive manner. And if you don't feel safe somewhere, it is always okay to leave, because your safety is number one, your mental health is number one, and you come first. And sometimes, and this is what I'll say too, that was a really extreme case for me, because I've had times where maybe farms were kind of not an okay fit, but I was willing to stay the week. Like it wasn't going to be the end of the world. So in those cases, that's also when it's important to be able to have conversations to make sure things don't boil up until the last moment. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Brittney. I also want to say you're getting a lot of love in the chat. All the things you're talking about, feeling at home, your whys, the magic you found, it's speaking to me. That's what Jen says.
Thank you, Jen.
I think just looking at the time, I want to hop to your next slide here, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say some people asked about contacting you, which I think that's coming up maybe in another slide here.
Yeah, I mean, I want to thank first like everyone for coming today. Like there's so many questions, and this is what I say, like one, you can save $10 off your WWOOF-USA membership. Like if you feel ready and confident to start woofing, like the code is Gardens of Soul, which is just like my business name. But actually in the next slide, if you go to, I'm actually going to be offering like one-on-one coaching calls for like anyone who wants to be a solo traveler, want to have like that really in-depth time to learn more about like woofing and like, is this a good fit for you, and like how to really feel confident. Like hopefully like my takeaway is that as many people as possible feel confident in their journey. But I think the reality too is like a big part of my journey when I first started is I actually reached out to so many people to ask questions to feel confident in my journey, because I didn't really know other solo travelers. And sometimes it takes getting to know someone and like hearing their experiences to feel like, okay, like this is something I can do. So if it's something that you're interested in, it's for really anyone who's wants to be a solo traveler or digital nomad, trying to pave a new path, or just like want to build confidence in pursuing like their dreams. Like it's gonna be an hour essentially where you can ask me any question related to woofing and solo traveling. But you'll be receiving like, in addition, for free, like I have an entering agriculture ebook that shares like all my top resources for how I entered agriculture, my exact wolf packing list, the list of interview questions I ask hosts, like the entire list of questions, and the exact templates I use to message my dream farms for how I had successful ways to interview hosts as well. Yeah, and then on the next slide.
Wait, can I ask one question about this slide, Brittney?
Sure.
Somebody in the chat asked if you would do this coaching with somebody who's a host, like, so kind of your flip perspective, if that's a possibility.
Yeah, I would love to do this with the host, because I think what's interesting too is that it's funny, I haven't counted how many farms I've been to, but I feel like I have visited and I've interviewed well over 20 farms, like hosts, woofers. I've also made many woofer friends in the space. And yeah, I've heard both perspectives essentially for many years. And I'm happy to do this for both sides as well.
Awesome.
Yes. And actually, Jenna, if you could even add the link for the coaching that I sent to you, the Calendly link, it's going to be in the chat below. And can you go back to this last slide?
Yes, I did just put the link in the chat as well.
Perfect. I also just want to say I'm also only taking 5 spots, like 5 coaching calls for this next month. WWOOF was such a big part of my life, and I'm so happy to see more people feeling confident and stepping into the role, which is why this webinar was really ultimately created. But I also am stepping into a new space in my life where I'm going to really be focusing on Gardens of Soul as a business where I can host more workshops and really amplify the good of growing good food and connecting people to nature. So this is really only an opportunity for the next month if you're interested in. Basically, the Calendly link only expires up to the end of February, and that's when I'll be doing the last of the coaching calls going forward.
Wow, amazing.
Thank you. Yes. And And if you want to connect and like follow my journey, you can follow me all Instagram, TikTok. It's at Gardens of Soul. My website is called Gardens of Soul. And if you ever want to email me about anything or you want to collaborate in any way, I love meeting other farmers. You can go ahead and send me an email. But say now February passed and the coaching sessions are no longer available. If you have WWOOF questions, I highly recommend, Jenna, the next slide. You can connect with WWOOF-USA. They are an amazing platform and resource. And what's really great is that they specifically have an email, which is info@WWOOF-USA, where you can ask them your questions. Oftentimes, like they host other webinars like this one as well, where if you're feeling unsure and you have a question, I recommend reaching out to them. If sometimes people reach out to me on social media, and while I'm so happy to share my experiences, it's also, I think, important to reach back to the organization itself, because there's just a plethora of knowledge already there that I know Jenna and the rest of the WWOOF team is happy to share with each of you.
Absolutely.
Great. And thank you so much, everyone, again, for being a part of today's webinar, a part of the journey, a part of the story, and for supporting it all. And you can keep following the story at Gardens of Soul. And thank you for the people saying thank you. Yeah, and if you're interested in coaching, the link's in the bio. Thanks, everyone. Sending so much love and light. I really am. Like, my heart feels so full right now, because like I just think about like all the women that can be solo traveling, like all the queers that can be solo traveling, all the BIPOC people that can be solo traveling, because the world's not as scary as other people try to paint it to be.